Hey lifers, Dustin here, and well, this is it. This is the final Heisman watch of the 2017 college football season. Considering by this time next week we will know who the Heisman Trophy finalists are, we will also know who the conference champions are and how those Heisman winners or Heisman finalists actually performed in the conference championship games, which I do think will go a long way in deciding their actual pecking order. This is what my ballot would look like. This is the final episode. So before I get to my top 10, let's look at last week's top 10. I'm not going to do a bubble players watch this week because at this point, the bubble players don't matter. There's no other chances for them to crawl in. So I'm going to look at last week's top 10, see how they performed, and then I will give you my top 10 ballot. As always, as I'm going through this, kind of think about who your top 5 would be, and let me know that down in the comment section. At number 10, I had Josh Adams, who had been falling over the last few weeks. And this is why. He ran it 20 times for 49 yards in the loss to Stanford. On the season, he has 191 rushes for 1,386 yards, 9 touchdowns, 10 receptions, and 82 yards. At number 9, I had Trace McSorley, who went 22 of 33 for 237 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also ran the ball 7 times for 36 yards and a touchdown in the win against Maryland. On the season, he's 252 of 386, good for 3,228 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 8 picks, and he tacked on 431 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns. At number 8 was Rashad Penny, who ran the ball 22 times for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns in his last regular season home game as an Aztec. On the season, he ran it 275 times for 2,027 yards, 19 touchdowns. He had 142 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 kickoffs returned for a touchdown, and 1 punt return for a touchdown. At number 7 is Saquon Barkley, who ran it 16 times for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 reception for 4 yards. On the season, he had 199 rushes for 1,134 yards, 16 touchdowns, 47 receptions, 594 yards, and 3 touchdowns, 2 kickoff returns for a touchdown, and a passing touchdown. At number 6 was last year's Heisman Trophy winner in Lamar Jackson of Louisville. He threw the ball 21 times, completing 15 for 216 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had 18 rushes for 156 yards. On the season, his stats are eye-popping. 241 of 399, 3,489 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, 6 picks. That would be good enough in and of itself, but he also added 208 rushes, 1,443 yards, and 17 touchdowns. At number 5 was Jonathan Taylor, who ran it 20 times for 149 yards and a touchdown. And on the season, he has 258 rushes, 1,806 yards, 13 touchdowns, 4 receptions, and 52 yards. At number 4 was Ronald Jones II, which had a bye week, which means going into the Pac-12 championship, he'll finish up at 212 rushes, 1,346 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns. He also had 13 receptions for 181 yards and a touchdown. At number 3 was Bryce Love, who ran the ball 20 times for 125 yards. On the season, he has 215 rushes for 1,848 yards, 16 touchdowns, and he also had 6 receptions for 33 yards. At number 2 was Mason Rudolph, 31 of 43 this weekend, 438 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he tacked on 2 rushing touchdowns as well. On the season, he was 297 of 457, good for 4,553 yards, 35 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He also had 29 rushing yards, but 10 rushing touchdowns. And my number 1 last week, even with his antics in the Kansas game, if we just look on the field, he was number 1. And this weekend, he went 14 of 17 for 281 yards and 3 touchdowns in a first half blowout of West Virginia. On the season, he was 247 for 346, 4,097 yards, 37 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He also tacked on 245 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. So here it is. If I had a Heisman Trophy ballot, for some reason they were reckless enough to actually give me a ballot, this is what my top 5 would look like. I think you just fill in the top 5. But for context, I'm going to do a top 10. Let me know your top 5 down below in the comment section. I think it'll be really interesting to see who most people think should be the Heisman Trophy winner and by how much. So we'll start with number 10, and I'll give a little blurb about each player, about why they are where they are. We'll see how it goes. At number 10, I had Penn State quarterback Trace McSorley. He was at times shined brighter on the season than Saquon did. There were times where his stats were more impressive. There was a game or two where he actually had more rushing yards than the running back, which actually spoke more to the running back than to him, but he was a leader. He always seemed to be able to march Penn State forward and get through a lot of adversity, and without him at the helm, there's no way they'd be in the top 10 right now. At number 9, I have Kerryon Johnson of Auburn. They would not be in the SEC championship without him. When they lost to Clemson, he was not even on the field. If you watch what he did in the Georgia and Alabama games, it is incredible. He's tied for number 6 in the country in rushing touchdowns, and even though he was on the bubble list last week, I did move him up onto my top 10 this week. At number 8 was Rashad Penny. Yes, he was a group of 5 player. Yes, he didn't always play the best competition in the world, but they did beat 2 Power 5 teams, including Stanford, which has Bryce Love on this list on it. He finishes up number 1 in the country in rushing yards, tied for number 3 in rushing touchdowns, and number 8 in rushing yards per attempt. He could catch the ball, he could return it on punts and kickoffs, he could do pretty much everything you wanted him to, which is why I have at number 7, Saquon Barkley. I kind of thought of him as Mr. Everything during the year. He had a habit of not showing up in some of the bigger moments, which is why I think, in my eyes, he dropped down this list a little bit. I do expect him to be in the top 5, if not the top 3, and invited to New York, but the way that I weigh it, he did a lot of really, really good things, and his stats rushing were pretty good, but nothing was ever great. I feel like if he had 1,500 or 1,600 yards rushing, 200 yards in some of the bigger games that Penn State played and eventually lost, then maybe he would be up there for me, but just not quite make it. But I will tell you this, if I was an NFL team in need of a running back, he would be the first one that I drafted. In saying that, at number 6, I do have Ronald Jones II of USC. He picked up USC's offense when Sam Darnold let it down at times. Watching him be the closer against Arizona was very impressive. He's a little bit better of a wide receiver than some of the running backs that are ahead of him, but his stats running just aren't quite where the other guys are. So just for that, I did drop him back just a little bit, but it would not surprise me at all. Apparently, some people have said that I have him higher than anybody else in the country. I think that's ridiculous. I think he deserves way more attention, way more praise based on what I've seen, but I did have to drop him back to 6, which would mean I would leave him off the official ballot if I had one. At number 5, I have last year's Heisman winner in Lamar Jackson. I mean, he leads the ACC in passing and rushing. His stats were even better than last year, but the problem was last year the only other true Heisman contender was Deshaun Watson, who had a buku of interceptions. If the award was given out after the season, I do think Deshaun would have won it. But considering where it was given out, Lamar Jackson made sense last year. I had videos talking about that. This year, in Louisville's toughest games against NC State and Clemson, he was non-existent. They kind of eliminated him in the beginning of the game. He did add some stats in the second half of both of those games, but he was surrounded by not the best team in the world. He didn't play the best teams in the world other than the 2 that he really kind of whiffed on. But Lamar Jackson, I think his stats alone in a Power 5 conference, he deserves to be in New York. And number 4, I have the freshman sensation from Wisconsin and Jonathan Taylor, not Thomas. He is number 3 in the country in rushing yards. He had to battle a couple of injuries during the course of this year. And Wisconsin, people talk about their strength of schedule. They're undefeated, and a large reason why is because of some of the plays, some of the moves, some of the times that Jonathan Taylor moved the chains. So he had some touchdown runs that were absolutely incredible this year. He is dynamic, and I have a feeling within the next year or 2, he will be way higher than number 4 on this list. And number 2, I have Bryce Love of Stanford. He finished up number 2 in rushing yards behind Rashad Penny, but he was number 1 for a lot of the season. He also finished up number 4 in yards per attempt, something else he was number 1 at for a large part of the season before Khalil Tate came in, and then he got limited in some carries and some injuries that he had to battle through late in the season. But after the Stanford loss to USC, I think a lot of people dismissed the Cardinal, and here they are with a rematch against the Trojans, and Bryce Love is a huge reason why they upset Notre Dame. He is a huge reason why. At number 2, I have Mason Rudolph. Now, between Mason Rudolph and who is number one, it kind of goes back and forth. It depends on what you're looking for in a quarterback. Mason Rudolph did finish the season number one in passing yards, number 3 in passing touchdowns, and number 5 in yards per attempt. Oklahoma State would be nowhere near where they ended up in the season without Mason Rudolph. He was kind of the brains of the whole operation. He was the linchpin of that offense. That is the reason that Oklahoma State won as many games as they did. But in the end, he just wasn't as dynamic. I never felt like, well, Mason Rudolph is on the field, therefore Oklahoma State's definitely going to win this game. That's the way I felt about number 1, Baker Mayfield. He comes with, I guess you would say, a lot of warts when it comes to his public persona. He kind of feels like a rebel at times. He kind of seems like a gunslinger. He does what he wants on and off the field. And at times that makes him the best player in the country. And at other times it makes him kind of not the best person in the world. And the Heisman Trophy is supposed to be about integrity. That is something they state. So I wonder how many votes that will cost him. But as not a Heisman voter myself, it's not my job to actually weigh that. I'm just looking at what's on the field, and what's on the field is pretty damn great. He finishes up number 1 in the country in passer rating again, number 1 in pass completion percentage, number 1 in yards per attempt, and number 2 in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. He broke all kinds of Oklahoma records, and I can't imagine him not winning, even with the stuff that happened on the field. At the end of the day, it wasn't like he murdered someone. It wasn't like he did something really despicable that everybody in the country should hate. He just kind of is a jerk and kind of an idiot at times. And there are times where you want fiery passion, and there are times where you don't. And the fiery passion is what helped them beat Ohio State, and the fiery passion is what helped him plant that flag at midfield, which was stupid. So I do have Baker Mayfield number 1. I don't think he's a perfect person. I don't think he is a perfect candidate as far as the Heisman Trophy's stated mission, but I do think that they have given the Heisman Trophy to way worse people in the past based on what they have or alleged have done. So I do have Baker Mayfield number 1. So there you have it, my final top 10 of the year. Like I said, by this time next week, we will already know who the Heisman finalists are. I will be making videos on each Heisman Trophy candidate. I'll make a why they should win, like the case for and the case against is I think what I called the videos last year. I'll probably do that again because I do think you need to put up the pros and the cons, kind of weigh them against each other. And I will kind of want to do that in each individual video because their finalist is about them. So I want to do it in each individual video. But now I want to hear from you. What does your final Heisman ballot look like right now? Let me know down in the comments section your top 5. I think it'd be really interesting to kind of poll them all together. I don't know if I'll do that yet and kind of present a subscription or subscriber Heisman or something. I don't know. But yeah, let me know your top 5 down below. Thank you so much for watching these videos all year long. These videos have always done really well. You guys have been very supportive, left a slew of comments telling me who should be where and why I'm wrong and why I'm right and how much you agree with me or disagree with me and giving your own lists. And I know that takes a lot of time and energy for you to kind of sit down and think about it and knock it out. And for a subscriber to leave a comment where they're actually thinking about things and ordering things is always really cool to me. So thank you guys very much for watching these videos. I really, really appreciate it. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time. For 49 yards in the loss to Stanford. On the season, he has 191 rushes for 1,386 yards, 9 touchdowns, 10 receptions, and 82 yards. At number 9, I had Trace McSorley, who went 22 of 33 for 237 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also ran the ball 7 times for 36 yards and a touchdown in the win against Maryland. On the season, he's 252 of 386, good for 3,228 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 8 picks. And he tacked on 4. Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and, well, this is it. This is the final Heisman watch of the 2017 college football season. Considering by this time next week, we will know who the Heisman Trophy finalists are. We will also know who the conference champions are and how those Heisman winners or Heisman finalists actually performed in the conference championship games, which I do think will go a long way in deciding their actual pecking order. This is what my ballot would look like. This is the final yards on the season. He had 199 rushes for 1,134 yards, 16 touchdowns, 47 receptions, 594 yards, and 3 touchdowns, 2 kickoff returns for a touchdown, and a passing touchdown. At number 6 was last year's Heisman Trophy winner in Lamar Jackson of Louisville. He threw the ball 21 times, completing 15 for 216 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had 18 rushes for 156 yards on the season, 431 rushing yards, and 11 touchdowns. At number 8 was Rashad Penny, who ran the ball 22 times for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns in his last regular season home game as an Aztec. On the season, he ran it 275 times for 2,027 yards, 19 touchdowns. He had 142 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 kickoffs returned for a touchdown, and 1 punt return for a touchdown. At number 7 is Saquon Barkley, who ran it 16 times for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 reception for 4 yards episode. So, before I get to my top 10, let's look at last week's top 10. I'm not going to do a bubble players watch this week because at this point, the bubble players don't matter. There's no other chances for them to crawl in. So I'm going to look at last week's top 10, see how they performed, and then I will give you my top 10 ballot. As always, as I'm going through this, kind of think about who your top 5 would be, and let me know that down in the comment section. At number 10, I had Josh Adams, who had been falling over the last few weeks, and this is why. He ran it 20 times.